Hey everybody, JJ here and happy Friday. Hopefully everybody's ending out the week on a positive and productive footing. We're back again here on Fridays for the PCDIY live stream show to be able to go ahead and talk about Sorry about that. We're here to just go ahead and be able to recap the latest and greatest in terms of everything that has happened in the last week when it comes to ASUS. And we've got definitely a lot to cover. If you guys have been checking out our course social media channels, we've been talking about quite a number of different things, and a lot of it has to do with, of course, 12th Gen Z690. We've got a lot of recent content that you guys can check out in terms of our social media channels, where we've got a recent AMA, which dives into quite a number of pretty much all the series that we've got for the Z690 series of motherboards. Yesterday, we went ahead and did a full live stream talking about our AIOC overclocking technology, as well as we actually gave a bit of a deep dive in terms of kind of understanding overclocking, some of the actual specific considerations that you want to keep in mind for Alder Lake, and what you might want to kind of be aware of when it comes to overclocking the P cores and the E cores. We talked a little bit actually about DRAM as well, although we've got an upcoming overclocking stream which will focus on DDR4 and DDR5 in respect to Alder Lake and XMP 3.0 and kind of a lot of really great stuff. So if you're interested in that, make sure to go ahead and follow us on our social media channels, and you'll be kept up to date once we get ready to kick off that live stream. Following up soon too, we're also going to actually be doing some other live streams that we're going to be covering actually our specific lineup of Z690 series motherboards independently. So to make it a little bit easier for you, if you're trying to figure out what is the right series and the right board for you, we're going to go ahead and have dedicated streams on the Prime series, the ROG Strix series, the Tough Gaming series, the Maxima series, which is also part of, course, the ROG lineup, and lastly, our ProArt series. So hopefully you'll be able to have a really good sense and understanding. And of course, if you've got more questions, you can always make sure to join the PCDIY group that we've got. It's a great community of passionate PCDIY enthusiasts, from creators to gamers to overclockers, that can help to give you more insight, as well as you can also ask questions directly to me, as well as kind of the ASUS family. So hopefully everybody is having a good stream. Happy to have you guys here. Hey, Ruben, no giveaway right now. We have actually been running quite a number of recent giveaways, and you definitely just want to make sure to be following any of our social media channels. I think probably in the last couple of months alone, we might have ran close to about 5 different giveaways. I think there's actually an extended period that might still be running. If you want, you can actually check out the PCMR subreddit, where we actually are running a giveaway that was going on there. But also, again, if you're part of our PCDIY group, I generally do announcements, and they're tagged with giveaways, so you kind of know any giveaways that we might be running at that time. So it gives you the opportunity to be able to check out. If you're looking for the opportunity to pick up some swag, then you make sure and do that. Okay. Hey, Erica, thanks for joining us on the stream. Hey, Robert, thanks again. Appreciate you checking out that stream. And, definitely we know that we've had a lot of people that were, I think, interested in that. And I think there might even be a follow-up stream that actually gets a little bit even more into some of the more advanced elements of overclocking in terms of kind of manual specialized presets and options. But yesterday's stream, we wanted to try to keep it a little bit more general, but also still provide a little bit more information for those kind of tweakers and tuners out there that might benefit from kind of some deeper understanding of what is going to be new on 12th gen Alder Lake overclocking. And again, guys, if you guys are interested in that, that video is up right now on Facebook and on YouTube. That gives you a deep dive into overclocking on 12th gen series CPUs, and it'll apply to your Core i5K parts, your Core i7K parts, as well as your Core i9K parts. So you're pretty much covered across the board. Fantastic to know, man. Thank you so much for your support, and it's awesome to know that you're happy with our products there, man. So let me go ahead and kick off a little bit of news, and I'm going to definitely take a look at your guys' questions if anybody's got any, so don't worry about that. I just want to go ahead and touch on a couple of bits, general updates and announcements that we do have kind of going on. Some of these might be some general recaps and things you might be already aware of, and some might not be, just to kind of depends on what your interest is going to be. So first up is just going to be a general recap. Again, Windows 11. Windows 11 is, of course, now out. Some of you might be deciding to go ahead and make your corresponding upgrade to Windows 11. Ideally, we always recommend a clean install for an operating system. I don't recommend upgrades, just because you increase the probability of running into certain issues. And when you go about a clean installation, you help to ensure the best foundation for the overall performance, stability of your system. But with that noted, I'm going to go ahead and link you guys here in the chat to our Windows 11 website, but I'll also go ahead and show you this site. So give me 1 second here, guys, and I'll show you exactly what's going on there. And I'm also going to give you guys a little bit of a tip, because there have been a couple of users that have decided to go about through an upgrade process, but have actually run into some issues. And it's a little bit tricky, but there is a possible way that you can help to resolve this issue by doing what's called a conversion to your partition table, so that if you actually do update your UEFI BIOS to Windows 11 BIOS, and you still have an issue, it could be due to the fact that you originally installed your Windows environment in a legacy operating mode, or it's referred to as Compatibility CSM mode. This actually requires you to convert your partition so that Windows will then actually be able to boot. It's a little bit more complicated, and part of the reason why I don't generally recommend upgrades, and I do recommend clean installations. But I'll give you guys some tips and a source that you can actually reference from Microsoft if you want to go about this conversion process. But with that, let me go ahead and just show you guys here our Windows 11 site. I will go ahead and link this in the chat for those of you that are interested. But we do have a full site that covers both Intel and AMD platforms. It shows all the compatible models that we currently have listed that essentially have UEFI BIOSes that have been made available for those boards. Essentially, this just means that you have to download the UEFI BIOS. Once it's flashed on the board, you then have essentially the baseline firmware that will allow you to install Windows 11. You don't have to make any kind of configuration settings or any kind of parameter adjustments. This is all that's required after you install that Windows 11 file, UEFI file. Now, one thing that you do want to keep in mind, though, is going to be that you might not necessarily yet see full Windows 11 driver support. So let's go ahead and pick a model, for instance. So here, if we go to the Crosshair 8 Dark Hero, if we head over to the support tab, and then we head over to the driver tabs right here, you're going to see that we now have updated the product pages. This has just recently happened, and we're going to have a little bit more of a formal announcement coming a little bit later as we span this out to more boards. But previously you only had Windows 10, but now you can see you have Windows 11, and you will see that there are now starting to populate some drivers that are present. You can see here we have the wireless driver, the chipset driver, Bluetooth driver. You will see actually over time some additional drivers. So as an example, if we head back over to Windows 10, we'll actually have a wider set of drivers. You can see here is a LAN driver. There's not only the chipset driver, but there's the audio driver. There's other actually drivers and utilities that are there. Now, Windows 10 and Windows 11 generally allow for interoperability, but Windows 11 does have a new driver model. So ideally, you do want to have a Windows DCH-based drivers for Windows 11. And these are right now being developed and validated by partners that are producing those drivers. So over the coming weeks, you'll continue to see those product pages updated and supported with essentially a more complete set of native Windows 11 drivers. So that's just something to keep in mind there if you're interested in upgrading to Windows 11. Let me go ahead and link you guys here in the chat to that page. And then I will also go ahead and give you guys a little bit of the insight here when I'm talking about the conversion tool. So give me 1 second here to link this in there. Actually, wrong link there. 1 second, guys. Okay, here we go. Here's the right link for you guys. This is the Windows 11 link. And now we're going to link over a video here. And this is going to be from Microsoft. And this is essentially a walkthrough process that will help you to kind of convert, again, your Windows partition so that if you have it installed in a legacy mode and you need to convert it over to what's called GPT or a native UEFI partition, you can go through this process. So ahead and get this for you guys. Okay, so here is the link. And I will drop this in there for you guys. And here I will also, again, show you guys exactly what I'm talking about here. So here we can see we're on Microsoft's mechanics site, and you'll see that here it tells you actually how to prepare and go through the conversion process. You want to watch this video and you can go from there. Again, though, I would generally recommend for most users that if you can, back up your information and then go through a normal clean installation of your operating system. Okay. All right, so let me go ahead and just see if we've got any questions here before we go over to our next segment. So give me 1 second, guys. Hey, Josh, if you're talking about the formula in terms of Z690, we've got more and more boards that have actually gone ahead and been listed online. So you can actually take a look at Newegg's website, Amazon as well. You're going to continue to see more listings over the coming days as far as more and more motherboards, but a pretty good amount of the actual motherboards have already been initially listed. There have some that have already been sold out, but of course we're working on replenishing to our corresponding channel partners. So just make sure to go ahead and keep track, of wherever the respective e-tailer is that you're looking at. We are pretty much doing a full channel wide release. So that means that, everybody from Micro Center to Amazon to Newegg, B&H, and many other retailers and e-tailers are carrying our Z690 series of motherboards. I think probably Newegg right now has probably the most extensive lineup listing already up and running, but you'll continue to see this get updated and essentially increase over the coming days. Okay. Let me just see here if we got anything. Hey, Bianca. So fantastic. Thanks for actually checking out the Maximus Extreme board and purchasing the Extreme board. So in terms of your question, so this user actually had a question in terms that what about SLI or NV-linked compatibility on essentially these newer generation series of motherboards? And it's a good question. Overall, statistically, the vast majority of users now are only going to be running one graphics card, but there might be certain situations where, of course, maybe you've got a pre-existing card, or maybe you have a specific workflow that benefits from that, or maybe you've got dual 3090s and you want to make sure that your board supports that. So let's go ahead and actually take a look at a product page and show you where you can actually confirm whether or not there's actually multi-GPU support. The vast majority of newer boards that have been released, really, I'd say over the last about almost 20 months to 24 months, generally do not feature multi-GPU support anymore. And that's just because, like I said, of change really that has come from the GPU partners themselves, where they're not necessarily focusing on multi-GPU development in terms of having multiple cards paired together to be able to kind of enhance performance, especially from a gaming perspective. You see it reserved more so for maybe something like a 3090, which also has uses within GPU compute and more specialized kind of work scenarios where it can be used for kind of acceleration purposes. And so that's the reason why 3090 does support that type of configuration. But let me go ahead and open up a page and we'll show you how you can go ahead and confirm on multi-GPU support on your motherboard. Okay, so we'll head over to this product page here, and we'll head over to the tech specs. Okay, guys, so here we have gone ahead and pulled up the actual product page. And it's pretty straightforward. What we're going to be looking for right here is you want to move over and check over in this section. So when you're actually checking for expansion slot information, there generally will be detailing in terms of the multi-GPU configuration. Most of this other is going to be the kind of the generalized specification. So let me go ahead and go through right here. So you'll see generally under graphics, right, one note, and then here you'll also see a GPU configuration support. So this user was asking about they don't actually see any listing. And we'll actually have to double check with our team on that, because there actually should be multi-GPU support for the actual Extreme model. So thank you for Bianca for asking in terms of helping to confirm that. So I'll make sure to pass that information over to our team and see if we can help to confirm that. And if you're not part of our PCDIY group, make sure to join our group. If you want to tag me there in a post, make sure to definitely follow up with you. If not, I'll try to follow up in your comment here on the stream after the fact, okay? But let's go ahead and maybe just look at, an older model, for instance, so that we can just, for reference comparison, know exactly how we would be able to view that information. So let me go ahead and bring up a prior gen board. We can actually bring up maybe Z590. I think that would work. And we'll show you here. So give me 1 second to load up this page, and we'll show you the spec information here. Okay, so here you can see we've gone ahead and brought up our Maximus Apex board. And here you can see under it actually notes multi-GPU support, and it tells you right there that it supports NVIDIA two-way SLI configurations. Okay, so that's the easiest way. Just make sure to look up that spec information, and that'll help you know what's going on right there. Hey, MIT, thanks so much for joining us. Fantastic to have you right here. Hey, GP, thanks for joining us again on the stream here. Dylan, thank you for joining us here on the stream as well. So Robert's asking here, with respect to Windows 11, is it feasible to upgrade? So that's a good question. Is it feasible to upgrade with bugs? It still seems to have. I think overall, actually, you'll find that for the majority of users, generally the overall kind of stability of the OS is actually quite good, especially compared to releases in the past where there might have been maybe more potential areas. Probably the really only big outstanding bug may have been for AMD-based users, and Microsoft has already worked to release an update to help to improve upon that. Beyond that, I think that as always, when you tend to upgrade, you have an underlying set of kind of configuration parameters, drivers, applications, services that are running in the background that increase the likelihood of there probably being some type of issue. That being noted, there's a lot of work that's been done to help to, I think, ensure that that goes through a little bit more cleanly, a little bit more reliably than in previous scenarios. But if you really care about ensuring the best type of stability and the overall best OS experience, then I would recommend, as I noted earlier, a clean installation of your operating system. And in fact, from an enthusiast perspective, I actually normally recommend a reinstall of your entire OS once a year, just because you can, within a year, you might even go through maybe one, maybe two actually milestone updates, and depending on a number of different factors, I think it actually helps to just maintain the overall kind of best snappiness, responsiveness, and stability to your operating system. And if you've got a good backup plan in place, it's actually not that much of a process to go through, but ultimately, of course, that depends on you. Right. All right, guys. I will go ahead and take a look at your next set of questions, but I do also want to go ahead and touch on something that was pretty cool that happened recently in terms of the 12th gen launch and a Z690. And that is going to be pretty exciting for us, is that we set a world record on our Z690 series boards. Here you can see 5 of our boards that, of course, we have in terms of the series, but the board that really we do want to call out where something special happened yesterday in terms of an announcement was the global world record that we achieved on our Apex series board, which is this guy right here. So the Maximus Z690 Apex was able to achieve over 7.5 gigahertz, and that memory number is pretty insane. Over 8.7 gigahertz, right? So mega transfers. It's a pretty insane number when you think about it. Of course, for the vast majority of you, this, of course, is not going to be achievable. So, you might look at it as being something that it's not really valid to you. But I think the really exciting part about it is more so is just to continue to show the capabilities of what these boards have been designed for. But I think the more interesting part is that for DDR5, it actually shows you that even very, very early on, there's a huge amount of maturity in terms of the frequencies that can be reached here. I can tell you, even for enthusiast real-world users, very early on are going to be able to comfortably be able to see reaching 6 gigahertz in their desktop configurations. So that means just in a general high-end gaming build that you put together, you could be running 6 gigahertz memory. That's impressive because if you talk about DDR4, realistically, most users were generally going to start to see, I'd say, a drop-off in terms of the frequency that was possible after about 4,000 megahertz. So definitely higher frequencies than that were possible. Actually, for Z590 last year, we demoed in real time in a live stream 5.3 gigahertz just through XMP. But the percentage of CPUs that could hit that are definitely going to be in the smaller quantity than the majority of CPUs. The really exciting part is in our internal testing for 12th gen, we're seeing almost all CPUs being able to hit almost 6 gigahertz, if not 6 gigahertz, which is pretty awesome. You then add to that the overclocking capability that's built into the CPU, and it's a very exciting platform for enthusiasts. And again, if you guys want to see a little bit more in terms of overclocking, you can go ahead and check out our live stream from yesterday. Now, one other thing that I do want to show you that is actually pretty cool is going to be that we do actually have a pretty cool feature on that Apex board. And this is going to be something that I think a lot of kind of the enthusiasts out there may appreciate in terms of kind of a specialized feature and level of functionality. So let me show you what I'm talking about here, guys. And I'll show you here. So let me bring this image up here. Okay. So this is a very, very cool accessory that we have on our Apex and Extreme Series boards, which is essentially the Voltage Technician. It's a specialized module that will be installed on the board that will give you essentially kind of like a USB oscilloscope type functionality where you can have advanced waveform monitoring information, so that if you're really kind of somebody that wants to spend some time kind of tweaking and tuning and really understand kind of what is going on in response to voltages, how they're actually working on their system, and being able to tune in kind of in a very accurate real-time fashion, that's where we've designed and developed this accessory. So it's definitely not going to be for the vast majority of you. For most of you, I think you're definitely going to rely on AIOC and the built-in monitoring that we have within Armory Crate or within other third-party applications. But for those of you that want to get that deeper dive and get even more information, it's a really, really cool accessory that we're offering right here. And I can actually show you a little bit more. So this is just kind of the overall topology of what it looks like. And this is actually the UI interface that we do have built in, where you actually can see where you can set off your your markers and your measurement values. You can start and stop the actual collection of the information in real time. And beyond that, let me actually show you. I think here I've got a little bit of a video that I can show you what the capture looks like in real time. So go ahead and load this up for you guys. Yeah, I've got it right here. So give me 1 second. All right, so here we go. Yeah, so here you can actually see the capture of the information happening in real time, and you have then access to the information. This can all be logged, and then it can be reviewed. Now, one thing you do want to keep in mind, again, is it's not necessarily something that every user is going to want, and it also is not applicable on every motherboard that we have in our lineup. This is going to be exclusive for the Apex as well as for the Extreme. So really going to be for those that are going to want that kind of that next level board in terms of tweaking and tuning. But it's something I thought I'd just show you guys, just because, of course, the Apex was the board that set this world record. So big kudos to our entire R&D team, and also a big kudos to all the amazing overclockers that worked with us to be able to go ahead and reach those results. Fantastic to be able to see that happen. Go ahead and just see if we got any questions right there. Let me see, sorry, right here. You'll be seeing the availability for the Extreme Glacial, just like the other boards that haven't yet been listed on Newegg, in pretty short order. So just make sure to go ahead and, like I said, keep it tuned to essentially any one of the e-tailers that are going to be looking to carry the boards. We would probably expect Newegg to probably be the first in terms of having those boards be listed. But our target is definitely over the next coming weeks to have pretty much all of the boards listed in there. It takes quite a bit amount of time, especially right now with all the things considered relative to the pandemic and logistics, to be able to get everything skewed up as quickly as possible. And I think right now already we've had something close to almost like maybe 13 to 14 boards already listed. So as we kind of are receiving those boards and we're pushing them out to distribution channels, it then takes a little bit of time for those distribution channels to not only receive those products, but to get them skewed up. So definitely rest assured you'll be seeing them come up in the not too distant future. All right, guys. So let me go ahead and keep moving things along here. And again, if you guys have any questions, feel free. We're going to be pretty light this week in terms of having any type of new product introductions, because we've already had so many in just the last few weeks. So I definitely want to take more time. And if anybody has any questions relative to anything within PCDIY or any one of the hardware components that we offer, feel free to go ahead and ask. No worries on that side, guys. So one other thing I do want to go ahead and touch on, and something you may not be aware of, but I have touched on it when we did originally launch it, but not that long ago, I believe in October we launched this, but we did essentially kick off a really cool bundle with Adobe for a wide range of our products. And so if any of you are kind of in that like semi-prosumer or creative space, and you use any one of kind of the Creative Cloud applications, so that could be Photoshop, Lightroom, Premiere Pro, Spark, there's a wide range of applications. One of the really cool things with this Adobe bundle is you actually will get up to 3 months included with the purchase of supporting ASUS products. So let me show you here the actual website that we have for this. And you can check actually those corresponding models that we do have that are compatible. So give me 1 second here. Now we'll bring that up for you guys. Okay, here we go. We have the bundle. All right, so I will go ahead and link this in the chat for everybody as well, so they can check this out if they're interested. So you will see actually down here that we have different products that will actually have a different level of a bundled, essentially kind of subscription included with it. The minimum would be 1 month, and then we have other products that actually have up to 3 months included with it. 3 months, if you consider kind of, I think, the base subscription price. I know what I pay right now, it's about $55 a month. That's actually quite a bit of savings that you're being provided, that you get actually included with the product. And so you can see right there, this does range actually on more than just our PCDI centric products, so including our laptops and desktops, mini PCs. We have different products, but namely, here in the PCDIY community, I want to focus on the items that we tend to talk about. So our ProArt monitors, and you can also send in see motherboards, including our newest ProArt Z690 creator would also apply. And you can also see AMD fans out there. If you're also considering AMD, don't worry, we've got you covered also there with the X570 creator, as well as with the B550 creator. So it gives you all the information in terms of how to actually run through the redemption. But again, I think that's a pretty cool promotion that we have. And especially if you're, like I said, you're going to be using these applications anyways, it's a great value add that you get essentially where you're getting this bundle for free. All right, guys. So one update that I wanted to get out of the way there. So give me 1 second here. And let me see here. Hey, Richard. Yeah, so why does DDR5 read Alder Lake quad channel, right? The main reason why is because there's actually a difference. I don't actually have a slide up here to directly show you, but the way that the actual memory is being read is that it has a same bank refresh. So essentially you can access the memory essentially if you want to kind of split the memory in half, one portion of the memory can be actually read, and then another portion of memory can be read. And this actually allows for a greater level of efficiency when actually memory is being utilized. This is also beneficial due to the fact that we're going to have much larger densities that are going to be available to you on DDR5. And the way that that actually registers is actually through kind of quote unquote dual channel and quad channel. So you can actually have 2 DIMMs and actually have it read effectively like quad channel. It's not exactly the same like it would be if you, of course, had a native quad channel type platform, but because there is some fundamental difference in terms of how the memory is being accessed compared to DDR4, that's the reason why it does register it. That's the reason why, if we talk a little bit yesterday about what was noted there in terms of kind of DDR4 to DDR5, a lot of people are only focusing just on CAS latency, and that's not really the right way to look at it. DDR5 actually brings quite a number of improvements in terms of not only superior stability because of on-die ECC to help to improve in terms of error correction, in general kind of fault tolerance. We then talk about the same bank refresh rate technology, which has been built in as well, the higher scaling in terms of the frequency support, and other elements all help to kind of give you a more advanced and mature memory technology. And that's really what DDR5 is. It's the next evolution of the standard. There's not really any benefit to DDR4 anymore, and DDR5 is the full-on replacement. Now, will there be, of course, scenarios if you want to really kind of get critical, and if you could find the right type of configuration for the absolute best of DDR4, maybe you can be somewhat competitive to kind of more entry-level DDR5? Yes, but as we continue to move forward, DDR5 is only going to continue to improve in terms of its overall efficiency, performance, and scaling, where DDR4 has effectively hit a wall, and you really can only get the best out of DDR4 in the most kind of specialized scenarios, right? Where that's really kind of the main benefit. If we talk about the pure baseline officially for DDR4 on any current platform is 3200 megahertz. That is all that's officially supported. Any value beyond that is an overclocked frequency. It's not officially supported. The user has to manually tune that. The CPU has to potentially support that, which isn't always a guarantee. The motherboard has to be programmed for that. And of course, those values are generally evident, right? They can be realized, but with DDR5, your minimum baseline that you're guaranteeing that you're starting off is at 4800. That is already kind of at the extreme end of what really isn't possible for most end users when it comes to DDR4 in almost any type of scenario. So I think the starting off point is quite strong, and of course you're going to easily be able to move beyond that. So hopefully that gives a little bit of insight there. Yeah, it's a great question, Harold. Why are there no 4-DIMM DDR5 kits? It's not that there aren't. Right now, it's just a question that you're talking about kind of production scaling. As I'm sure you may be aware, there's a lot of different challenges in the industry right now in terms of production, fabrication, and then logistics in terms of a lot of different aspects right now, just relative to the world in terms of kind of semiconductor production, IC production, and so many of the aspects that go into producing kind of advanced electronics. All right. And so in that regard, it's just trying to scale out, I think, the right type of DIMMs to the market, you know, in the right configurations. The reality is if you take a look, is that 4DIMM really isn't a requirement for the vast majority of users, because DDR5 already supports densities that are higher than what you traditionally saw on DDR4, such as being able to get, you know, 16 gig DIMMs readily at launch, which took us a while to get to when we talk about in comparison to DDR4. It means you can already have 32 gigabytes. And there are already some 32 gig kits that are available. They will probably be in smaller quantities than in 16 gigs, but that means you can effectively already either have a, I've seen actually, I think all three levels. I've seen your traditional 16 gigabytes, your traditional 32 gigabytes, and then a smaller selection of even 64 gigs, which would be 232. So in that situation, there's not really a value to needing a 4DIMM configuration, right? I know some users prefer 4DIMM because they want to see physically all the memory populated. They just like that from a visual perspective, and especially if they're going with kind of an RGB light illuminated setup, they kind of like that. But you will see it eventually. It's just it'll take a little bit of time. I was looking for a ROG 40-inch monitor. Yeah, we actually already have an ultra wide. So we already have an XG series 49-inch monitor. So we already, I think, have you covered right there in terms of if you're looking for something that is that large. I mean, right now, the vast majority of the most recent monitors that were released have generally been, I'd say, within kind of your traditional 24 up to about a 32 or 34 inches. Generally larger than that sizes, they become quite niche. They're not really kind of a broadly adopted size or configuration. We have had a couple of other releases that have kind of been popped up in there, a couple of 34s and a couple of sizes a little bit bigger than that, but we already do have an ultra wide 49-inch. So if that's something you're interested in, it's under the ROG Strix lineup with the ROG XG series. You can check that out there if you're interested. All right. Okay, guys, and last thing, let me see here. Yeah, we got our Adobe Bundle out of the way, Windows 11 announcement, and then Z690 series recap and our world record recap. So those were the main items that I did want to go ahead and touch on. And then lastly, for those of you that might enjoy maybe refreshing your system with a brand new wallpaper, we do have some new wallpapers. Not ROG wallpapers, but actually ProArt series wallpapers. So I'm going to go ahead and link this in the chat as well, if anybody has any interest in checking these out. Go ahead and show you these guys as well. We just finished these up, and they were done by a great colleague of us that works with us to help to create these at times, Triumph Arts, and you guys can see them right here. So we've got one here with the ProArt, another ProArt, and another ProArt. They're a little festive. They kind of, I think, align with the end of the year kind of season, a little bit kind of fall, winter, snow vibes. Although I'd love to hear your guys' feedback. Does the end of the year always have to be snow related? I feel like that's a little biased towards coast. Love you guys over on the East Coast, but I'm here on the West Coast, right? I'm like, you don't see snow. It can be November and December, and there doesn't have to be any snow. So I don't want to continue to propagate the narrative that you always have to have snow just because it's the end of the year, right? But these are still some beautiful wallpapers, and feel free to go ahead and download them and check them out. And of course, if you guys want to check out some other wallpapers more on the gaming side, we have the very famous ROG wallpaper lineup, which pretty much gets updated every single year. And every few months, we usually add in a couple of more wallpapers in there. So if you're looking for some awesome stuff there, check that out. And I also recently in the PCDIY group dropped some new wallpapers for Tough Gaming crowd. So if you're on the Tough Gaming side, we've got some new stuff for you guys there as well. All right. Let me go ahead and close that out and double check right there. So, hey, Yep, thanks so much for actually ordering. So you ordered the ROG Strix Z690-A. I think I have it over here. That's this board. It's a beautiful board right here. So you pick up this one. This is the DDR4 version of that motherboard, right? So we do offer almost all the other ROG Strix boards. They are going to be DDR5, but the -A is going to be DDR4 as opposed to DDR5. And he is asking, okay, so I've got a Samsung 980 Pro M.2 SSD, and do I put the M.2 on the first slot next to the PCIe Gen 5 slot, right? I'm new to M.2. Okay, so That's a great question. So what he's asking is essentially right here underneath here, this is going to be where the primary M.2 SSD is, but there's also some slots. So let me actually go ahead and bring up the product page for this and show you actually how to reference this in the manual, so that you kind of have a clear understanding. Technically, I will say it won't really matter because you can run PCI Gen 4 from the chipset, or you can run PCI Gen 4 from the CPU. Now, technically, from a speed and kind of performance perspective, you do want to use the lane that's provided to you from the CPU. And what I mean by that is essentially there's a connection, the connection on the motherboard that comes from the CPU to this M.2 slot. Ideally is going to be the best when it's coming from the CPU and not necessarily from this chipset. Effectively, the performance will be just about the same, but there's technically a little bit lower latency. Let me show you, I think, an image that might make this a little bit clearer. So give me 1 second here, guys. I think I actually have our chipset image. Yeah, this will work. Okay, so if we're looking at this actual chipset image, you'll actually see that at the top it says right there, Intel 1700 12th gen. You'll see right there, there's a little line that is noting to you, hey, you've got the PCI Gen 5 16 lanes. That would be for the graphics. And then you've got PCI Gen 4 4 lanes. That would be for an M.2 SSD. So that means that the CPU has a dedicated kind of reserved lane just for high-speed M.2 SSDs, right? If we then go to the chipset will also be able to support that PCI 4 connection for M.2 based SSDs. So you can use either or, but technically the latency, as I noted, is a little bit better when you talk about connecting it directly to the CPU. So let's bring up the actual product page for this motherboard. So you can actually check this for anybody else, if they're kind of wondering, how do I check for this information? I can do that. So give me 1 second here, and we'll bring up the product page for this board. And there is a couple of different ways to do this. You can do this sometimes through the tech spec, and then the other way is actually to look at it through the manual. Okay, so let's first take a look here at the tech spec. Okay, so if we go ahead and open up the product page right here, sorry, USB, Ethernet, storage. So you see right here, it says Intel 12th gen, right? So it's telling you that the M.2 1 slot, right? So 1 would designate the actual marking on the motherboard. That 1 slot will be enabled and support PCI Gen 4x4 operation. So that is the slot that you would want to use. If you wire it into one of the other slots, because this motherboard gives you up to 4 M.2 slots, you can see slot 2, slot 3, and slot 4 will also be able to support PCI 4x4, PCI by 4x4, and PCI 4x4. They will all support that, and those ones all come from the chipset, right? So you pretty much just have to reference that information then within the manual. The manual will also give you that same information. So again here, if I go to support, go to the manual, and we go here and we open up the manual. Let's make this a little bit larger, and I will hopefully be able to show you guys here. Let me make this a little bit smaller so I can see it. You'll actually, there's usually a section here, M.2, right? It'll tell you actually here, remove this. And I could go through this. I've actually done demos here live on the stream that actually show you how to go through the installation process. But if we go all the way up to the top here, top of our manual, the manual here will actually show you which slots are which slots. So you can see right here, this M.2_1, right? That's what we're looking for. We can see right there that that is that primary. So your question was, is it the one that's underneath the CPU socket? Yes, that is correct. It's the one that's underneath the CPU socket. For some reason, the numbering was different, where if we go down here, you can see M.2_2, M.2_3, M.2_4. That gives you then the clarity to know this is the slot that I want to utilize. So hopefully that answers your question. Not too complicated, pretty straightforward. So ultimately, the manual is your friend, helps to give you guidance from there. But best of luck in installing that, man. And thanks for being Team RG and Team Strix. I'd love to see you post your build in our PCDIY group, which if you guys are not, let me also go ahead and link that here in the chat for you guys. It's also linked if you guys are checking us out on Facebook or you're checking us out on YouTube. Love to have you guys join the group. It is linked in the description for both of those places. So let me see here. We've got another question from Black Forest. Can I add a 4x M.2 card in the last slot? right? And get, so this is a very interesting question. So the user is asking if they want to install something like this. This is a M.2 hyper card, right? This one is actually only a 2 slot, but we do manufacture one that supports 4 SSDs. Now, the thing that you have to keep in mind when you're talking about actually one of these cards is that they support a technology. Actually, they use a technology called PCI bifurcation. So it's important that you actually confirm that the slot that you're going to use on whatever motherboard supports PCIe bifurcation. If it doesn't support PCIe bifurcation, then it won't correctly be able to actually utilize all 4 of those slots for when you're installing your M.2 SSDs. As long as you see that that is listed in the tech spec information, then you will be able to go ahead and install one of those cards. And then depending on how the card is configured, you can either have individual drives, or you could have them also in a quote unquote rated configuration. Okay, so hopefully that answers your question there. So Harold has one other question here. It says, one more, if I choose to bifurcate a by 16 PCI Gen 5 slot, which is irrelevant because you don't have any PCI 5 Gen devices, right? But I'm assuming what you mean by the PCI Gen 5 slot would be the primary slot, which generally wouldn't be the slot that you would want to use, because that slot is, of course, enabled really for your graphics card. So most users are going to use that. But let's see here. Would a by 16 lanes, would a 16 lane PCI Gen 4 still work fine? Yeah, I think if I'm understanding your question, you're asking essentially, is the reduced bandwidth still fine? Yes, it's entirely still fine. If we talk about kind of any modern high performance graphics card, even like a high end RTX like 3080, 3080 Ti, a 3090, even if that was only operating at an 8x speed on PCI Gen 4, that would still be enough to pretty much effectively get the full performance out of the card. There are a couple of rare little scenarios that there could be a little bit of loss in performance. They're very conditional and very specific to certain types of workloads. And in most situations, we're not talking about a large performance reduction. We're just talking about a small reduction in terms of performance. So in your kind of setup configuration, if that's what you ended up having to do, and you essentially dropped down to only having that that slot operate at by X, you don't really have to be worried like all of a sudden I'm going to be losing a massive level of performance. In vast majority of situations, you would effectively see the same performance between by 16 and by 8. Okay, Takeover. So Takeover's got a question is, I have a question about the ROG Strix Z690-E motherboard. Okay, so great motherboard right there. Let me just see what your question is going to be here. Will you be able to put your NVMe Gen on the top M.2 slot, or will it be able? Yeah, so you're essentially just asking if you could put in a Gen 4 based M.2 SSD. 100%. There right now are no PCI Gen 5 graphics cards, and there's no PCI Gen 5 M.2 SSDs. They'll be coming out in the future. So your question is essentially, will you be able to, like again, on the Z690-E, which that motherboard does support, it's a little bit more special, right? And it's a little bit more like our Maximus series motherboards, where the actual slot for the M.2 SSD is also supports PCI Gen 5. So not all motherboards will give you PCI Gen 5 for this primary graphics card slot and the M.2 slot, but the -E board does. But in your situation, you're essentially just asking if you were to put in a M.2 SSD that is only PCI Gen 4 by 4, will it work? Yes, it will work fully backwards compatible, so you don't have to worry about that. Hey, Cleto, happy to have you here. Thanks for joining us for the stream. Hey, Gourmand, will a GTX 1080 work in a PCI Gen 5 slot? Yes, no worries in that regard. Pretty much any modern graphics card, doesn't matter whether it's a 10 series, whether it's a 20 series, 30 series, it could even be older than that. They will all work. They'll just work at the slower, essentially designated speed that they were designed for. So the vast majority of cards, except for the latest cards that of course are out, which are PCI Gen 4, you're going to be talking about that they're only going to be operating in PCI Gen 3 speeds. So yes, you drop it in there, it will work. You shouldn't have any concerns. The only thing is that for some of you that might, for some reason, have maybe very, very, very old cards, and we'd have to be going back into an older class, something maybe like in, to some degree, maybe like the 900 series of cards. This would also apply for AMD series cards that are in the older generation. There is something that is called a VBIOS that is a part of the graphics card. And that VBIOS does actually have to be updated to support called something native UEFI VBIOS support. We actually ourselves, as you know, a worldwide graphics card manufacturer, we had to release VBIOS updates for certain graphics cards to allow them to support this new type of functionality. Essentially, it just has to do with the protocol in terms of how the device is recognized and how it's initialized, essentially how the motherboard is going to work with essentially those devices that are connected. And ideally, you want your device to support native UEFI booting. That helps ensure the best overall kind of performance in terms of how fast your system will initialize all the hardware. So if you have a really old card, physically it will work, but potentially it might not actually initialize if it's running an older VBIOS. Now, our motherboards do have a feature that is backwards kind of compatible. This is actually gets back to the very beginning of the stream when we talked about CSM and legacy support and how Windows gets installed. But moving forward with Windows 11, we're defaulting to only wanting to initialize and prioritize these new type of devices because it's now been years that these devices have been on the market. It doesn't really make sense to try to keep compatibility at the highest level when the vast majority of cards that people are now using are these newer type cards. So just keep that in mind. If for some reason you're bringing over an older graphics card to a very, very new system, that is something to be mindful of. Okay. Yes, Robert, can you use a PCI Gen 3? 100%. You can use PCI Gen 3 or you can use PCI Gen 4. It doesn't matter. And that goes for both the chipset slots or the CPU link slots. So either slots, when you're talking about a Z690 series motherboard, it's entirely fine. This would also apply for current AMD-based platforms. So again, if you had like a X570 series motherboard and it had PCI Gen 4 slots, it doesn't matter. You can run PCI Gen 3 devices on there. They're fully compatible. You don't ever have to worry that it's not going to work. The only time that you would ever have to worry is they're not as common because now the drives have become so much cheaper. But here's an example. This is an M.2 SSD, right? There are M.2 SSDs that are not PCIe based. They're not using the NVMe protocol and they're not using PCI Express, which is the primary linked protocol for how the device gets initialized. They still use the older SATA protocol. In that situation, only some slots that will be on the motherboard are certified for SATA support. And that's again where you would want to check your manual and see, does the manual actually note that there's SATA support? There are still a lot of M.2 drives that are on the market that are being sold. They tend to be some of the most least expensive options, which they're still very fast. I mean, a SATA-based M.2 SSD or a SATA-based traditional 2.5-inch SSD still much faster than a regular hard drive. So they're still very good drives. But just keep in mind that you do have to make sure that for that type of slot, it does actually certify support for SATA along with PCIe. Okay. Hey, Black Forest. So does ASUS have a patent for that? I can't fully disclose that. I can tell you that for many of the design implementations, we do work on trying to protect our IP technology. For some of you that might be wondering essentially what he might be talking about is that we have a very cool feature on the latest generation of our motherboard, Z690, which is this right here. It's the Q release button. And I actually can show you guys a close-up of it. So give me 1 second. I'll move this motherboard here. It's a pretty cool feature, and essentially what it allows you to do is to eject your graphics card, but without having to kind of worry about anything. You can literally just press this button and it will help you to eject your card. So let me show you guys here. Get a close-up of the board. Okay, so let's show you guys here. So here we've got the motherboard. And so this is the primary slot where you do install your graphics card, right? So normally you would have to try to press this latch mechanism down, right? So you would install the graphics card, you to go ahead and depress this. I don't have a graphics card right now that I can go and pull. If you guys really want to see it, let me know, and I'll grab a card. Actually, let me go ahead and do that. Give me 1 second, guys. I will grab that for you here. So give me 1 second. All right, guys, I'm back here. I've got a graphics card, so I'm going to go ahead and install the card. And you'll see that I've got this card installed. So normally right now, the card is actually locked. So you see, I can't pull it out, right? I would have to try to press this latch, which you can see it's a little bit tricky, especially because now there's the M.2 heatsink that's also in place, right? But now the great thing is I can press this button. Once I press this button, this will engage the actual mechanism. And now I can just pull out the graphics card. So that's what they're asking about there. And that feature is what we call our Q release feature. That is brand new. It's only right now on select Z690 series motherboards, pretty much on all of our ROG Strix series motherboards, as well as our ROG Maximus series motherboards. All right, guys, give me 1 second here. Just let me see if there's any other questions that popped up right there in that moment. Okay, so see right there. ASUS. Hey, Osquitz, I believe. I'm sorry. Oxz, is that correct? In terms of pricing information, it's a little bit hard for me to comment on that. You know, every region has different distribution, actually has different conversion, has different infrastructure, so there can be respective costs. We're based out of ASUS North America, so we cover ASUS in terms of the United States and ASUS in terms of Canada. So I can comment in types of those situations, but pricing structure for other regions, so whether that's ASUS Australia, Japan, you know, South Africa or Russia, you would have to confirm with ASUS in your region their respective rollout of those products and then the pricing structure that they have in that region. Oh, hey, David, that's a great question. What ASUS AIO coolers are compatible with Alder Lake with 7th gen? So I'm happy to tell you it is all of our coolers. It does not matter. Any single one of our coolers, they all do feature actually in the box the actual brackets. So this right here is like the contents of actually what comes included with the actual our current generation AI coolers. They all come included inside the box right now with 1700 mounting bracket hardware. So you're good to go in terms of both the Ryugen 2, which is this cooler right here, the Strix LC2, and the Tough Gaming Series 2. I can actually show you those coolers there in a moment if you want. But if we do go back to here, our motherboard that I did position down, I can actually show you something as well, that all of ASUS's Z690 series boards do feature a cutout design right here in terms of the mounting points. These mounting points will support socket 1200 as well as socket 1700 series coolers. So if you're kind of a little bit of an interim situation, you don't yet have the bracket, or you haven't yet had the chance to go with an ASUS cooler, which is what I would recommend, of course, you do have the ability that you can use a socket 1200 cooler on ASUS series motherboards. So that's an exclusive design feature right now that is on ASUS series Z690 motherboards. It is not limited to any specific models. Pretty much all the ATX models in our lineup do have that essentially mounting hole support. So you are good to go in that regard. You don't have to kind of worry about that. And let me go ahead and show you guys here, if you guys want to see a little bit in terms of the coolers that we have. I can show you that. So we have a few different coolers in the lineup. These are all brand new. They're actually shipping right now to distribution, so you should see them actually pop up pretty much moving into right now November. You'll see them in terms of availability. Here's the Ryugen 2. This is kind of our flagship series unit. You can get this unit in 240 and 360 millimeter configurations. It comes already with Noctua fans, and it also comes with that really beautiful big 3.5-inch display. And this is our kind of our highest performing unit. It also has an integrated VRM assist fan to kind of cool the surrounding area of the CPU socket. This is our ROG Strix LC2 series cooler. This one will have an actually 120, 240, and 360 configurations. So pretty much all the most popular configurations. And we'll have an ARGB version and non-ARGB version. And this is the Tough Gaming 240 version, which is updated to align with all of our Tough Gaming based designs. So that one right there is, I believe, only initially available going to be in the 240. But all the way around, we've got you covered pretty much in every configuration you could be looking for. Hey, Alex. So, I would strongly recommend actually consider checking out the actual live stream that I did from an AMA if you're kind of trying to understand pricing. Because if you actually talk about the respective features and designs, there's a lot of additional functions and features that are built into the boards that if you just take a look at things from a very basic perspective, you might not really be understanding the differences. One example I can just give you of something that most people don't even account for would be, let's say, the additional hardware that we put on an ROG Maximus Hero board, such as the differential dye sense monitoring. This is actually a specialized hardware design, which no other manufacturer offers, even in higher end models, quote unquote, that gives you actually more advanced voltage monitoring that's actually much more accurate as opposed to traditional socket-based monitoring for voltages. Another example of this could be actually the dedicated water cooling zone. So there's actually headers down here at the very bottom of the motherboard. Let me see. I can actually bring up an image right here. So let me actually show you here. But again, this is kind of one of these things that sometimes some users don't even know that they're there because it can be tricky. Sometimes when you're just looking at like a product page or you're looking at a comparison chart, you're looking at kind of the numbers of slots for something, but you might not really be accounting for the total design of a product and all the kind of the additional features that come on a product. So let me go ahead and show you this here, and we'll give you a little bit of an example. So here we're looking at the Hero board, and we talked about that. Remember, this one already has something that's Q release, right? This is a special design mechanism where we actually have to spend money to put this into the motherboard. No other motherboard vendor is going to give you this right now in Z690. This is exclusive to ASUS. Another actually example of this could be here. This ultra high speed quick charge 4.0 technology actually also requires another hardware based design on the motherboard to give you advanced up to 60 watt power out from the front USB-C header that could be supported on future chassis, right? This even advanced RGB lighting design that we call our poly-mode display is a much more advanced and robust type of just display than just your kind of traditional standard RGB lighting. So that is a more costly implementation. The differential dye sense socket monitoring, the voltage monitoring technology, that's also something that, again, you kind of don't immediately see, but it is there as well. This is the water cooling zone headers that I was talking about, where we actually have specialized headers that have been built on board that allow you to do the temperature inlet and temperature outlet monitoring and flow monitoring. And that's all built onto the motherboard. And even there, that's not everything, but I can tell you those elements alone are going to be things that you wouldn't even see on another motherboard manufacturer. So again, we do kind of try to really have the stack be rich and diverse. So if you don't want to necessarily spend everything you need to, spend as much on, like, let's say, a Maximus Hero board, that's okay. The Strix series are fantastic. I think the Z690-F, the Dash A boards are fantastic value. Even the actual Tough Gaming board, I think, is actually a really, really strong value. So, I think our boards start off at around $220. So I think that's a very reasonable price point to be able to work from. But I'd strongly recommend check out that AMA overview that we have that covers kind of the series and a little bit of a deeper dive. And if you have more questions, feel free to tag me in the group. You could ask right now. Or, in this upcoming week, like I said, we're going to have dedicated streams on just each one of the respective series, and we'll dive really into each one of the series and the boards so that you have the best understanding of all the things those boards have. Because even right now, with some of the reviews, some of the content's coming out there, they're going to maybe be kind of high level, and they won't really talk about all the complete value. Even think about things like all the Maximus series motherboards and come included with the full 1-year license version of Ada 64. If you want to go buy that software from Ada, that alone, just that license is $25, and you get that for free. It's included with every Maximus motherboard. So hopefully that answers a little bit of your questions there. Hey Munch, as far as kind of general stock and availability, don't worry, man. We got you covered. We've got more boards coming in pretty much on a consistent basis. So just make sure to keep it tuned to Newegg, Amazon, Micro Center, whatever the retailer it is. And rest assured, over the coming days, you're going to continue to see consistent restocking. Some of them are doing notification notices. Some are doing even pre-order availability. But we are working with our channel partners to try to get out as many boards as we can. Let me just see right there. So Black Forest, the ASUS AIOs do not have the ability to actually have the coolant be essentially refilled. Part of that process is because if you design the cooler to be open in service like that, it could potentially actually affect the pressure and affect the maximum actual lifespan in terms of the permeability. So there's a lot of actually specialized testing that goes on by Asetek, to even including for the actual tubing material and other elements, to make sure that that helps to maximize the lifespan. That's the reason why all the AIOs have 6-year ratings on them. And actually in many situations they'll last even longer than that. That's just kind of a general, I'd say, guaranteed kind of basis perspective. But when you go into potentially offering a refill, you can compromise that and can get more complicated. This is the reason why even in custom water cooling setups, sometimes some users may have to start refilling within a year for different reasons, depending on actually how much load, how much stress, and how the actual loop is configured. So we generally find that for users that want that type of flexibility, they're going to go with a more custom type configuration setup, which of course we have many partners that work with us from custom water cooling, whether it's, EK, Fantex, Thermaltake, Bits Power, Alpha Cool. There's tons and tons of partners that are out there. Hey, Morris. So you're asking here. So it actually depends on the motherboard. So why are the VRMs? And so actually, more critically, it's not just the VRM. So his question here, for those of you that are wondering, is if we take a look here at our image for our motherboard. Actually, let me see. I might have a motherboard where I've got the direct VRM exposed. Give me 1 second here. If I do have one, I'll show you guys. So it makes it a little bit easier to know what he's talking about. Not 100% sure if I have one here. So give me 1 second. Not, I'll use a general reference image, or I could take the heatsink off of the motherboard if you guys really want to see. I can do that. That's no problem. Yes. Okay. So here I can do it with this image. All right, let's show you here. So this user was asking a little bit about the power delivery. So here they're asking about these components. So this is what's called your power delivery. A lot of people just will generalize this in terms of the quote unquote VRM. So your VRM is generally going to be comprised here of your power stages. These right here, these kind of silver looking items are the inductors, the chokes, right? And then we also have our capacitors. Then there's also going to be the PWM. Kind of all of that comes together to be the power delivery. Now, when you talk about the overall life experience in terms of power delivery from a motherboard, this is important, but it's not the only determining factor, because there's a lot of different ways that these power components can be set to in terms of operate, right? So on many boards, we've used things like our teamed power stage design, which means that we've actually taken multiples of these components. We have them actually configured in a way that they're simultaneously working in tandem to be able to actually provide even a higher level, what's called transient performance. That's kind of one element. But even beyond that, if I kind of go back to, let's say, trying to give an analogy, which I've given before, which is kind of, let's go from a car. If you take the world's best engine, but then you have poor brakes, a poor transmission system, poor body to rate ratio, right? You don't have a good, an overall kind of total design. Doesn't matter that you have the world's best engine, you're going to have a very poor experience, right? And similarly with a motherboard, we really try to look at the entire holistic design, because that's how you make a great board in terms of its stability, functionality, and the overall experience, especially relative to overclocking. The VRM is going to be one component, but you also need to critically look at the PCB topology, the trace design. A critical part is going to be the UEFI firmware, so the settings in the BIOS and how the board responds to those configurations. If you don't have those, you're going to have a poor experience. You need to have all those things working in tandem. We feel very confident in the power delivery of all of our motherboards across the lineup, even from, I'd say, entry-level boards like the Z690-P all the way up to like Maximus series class boards. Now, when you take a look at some of those numbers, also keep in mind that some numbers will not always give you also all the information. There are some components such as what are called smart power stages as opposed to more traditional power stages. And smart power stages might be maybe a little bit lower in terms of the overall amperage, but they might be more intelligent in terms of how they function and how they operate, so they can be more efficient. But ultimately, the main thing, right, is if you buy a Core i5, a Core i7, a Core i9, if you put it into the board and you decide to go ahead and overclock it, are you going to get a stable and reliable experience? Unquestionably, yes. Is there going to be more enough power even on the entry-level boards, right? Even let's go down to, again, one of the more entry-level series, the Tough Gaming Z690 board. This is going to give you a great overclocking experience. There'd be no problem really being able to effectively push a 1209K on this all the way to the limits of 5.4, maybe even 5.5 if you got lucky with a good CPU sample and you had good cooling. It's entirely possible on this board. The Maximus class boards, which feature our best power delivery designs in relation to the power components and their heat sinks and kind of the totality of their board design, they're just going to be even more efficient, have a little bit better tolerances at keeping you kind of maybe stable at kind of the outer edges, and also have a little bit better temperature performance on the operation across those components when they're under load. And that's because their components are generally going to be rated for a higher level. They're going to have higher tolerances, right? So hopefully that answers your question in that regard. All right. Sorry here, let me just see right there. Hey, yes, for the Ryugen 2360, in terms of the availability, oh, sorry there, give me 1 second there. Ryugen 2360 availability. Yes, it will be available shortly. So we talked about that a little bit earlier. Expect availability a little bit later this month. We're right now working to push it out to channel partners. Hopefully, maybe in the next 7 to 12 days, you should see it pop up. I'd probably say maybe Newegg is probably going to be one of the first, but it is already being pushed out to the channel. So you'll see the Ryugen 2, the Tough Gaming LC RGB edition, as well as the RG Strix LC2 models. Hey, Black Forest, AG, ROG Strix Z690F, max speed is 64. So when you take a look at the quote-unquote memory validation speed, keep in mind that's just the QVL that we've gone ahead and rated. It doesn't mean that actually speeds that are faster than that won't be supported. It just means that they haven't necessarily been qualified. Now, part of this is because the validation is still early on, right? So even at that time, there wasn't even any official XMP kits that had been validated for that. I also do want to be very clear and very frank right here, is that there's a misconception that people think that just because you see something in a QVL means that you can achieve it, and that's not actually accurate. When you talk about the actual CPU, the motherboard, and the RAM all have to be kind of in concert for you to be able to reach X frequency. So why do I say this? This is very, very important to understand. The baseline frequency that is supported by the platform is 4,800 megahertz, right? Values over that are overclocked frequencies. They are not guaranteed, but Intel's memory controller is really, really robust. It's quite impressive. What I mean by that is that even though you're attempting to overclock a frequency, pretty much the memory controller is going to be able to run at that speed. And all of our kind of initial testing, we've generally found that pretty much almost, I wouldn't say 100%, but let's just say probably, over probably 90% of CPUs, right? Almost all CPUs, 80 to 90% of CPUs will be able to reach close to, if not 6 gigahertz or 6,000 megahertz in terms of DDR5. Once you go over that frequency, the limiting factor is not generally going to be the motherboard. The motherboard may be playing a part, and I'm referring to ASUS here. I'm not going to speak to other manufacturers because I know what our designs are capable in terms of our what are called trace designs and our topology for memory. Okay, but you will begin to see a kind of degradation that occurs. And that's because the memory controller may not be able to actually run at that memory speed, regardless that the motherboard gives you a setting that you can go in there and you can set it. You could go buy 6,600 megahertz memory and it's been validated at that speed, right? It doesn't mean that the CPU that you're getting that's going to be installed on there can actually run at that speed. And that will go down. Like in our testing, I would probably say it'll be a very small percentage of CPUs that will be able to reach 6600 megahertz, right? You'll have to have an extraordinarily kind of lucky CPU to be able to hit even higher frequencies. Now, as we move towards the future, that of course could change. There could maybe be tuning improvements that occur that allow the scaling to kind of go over 6,000. But when we consider that the baseline is 4,800 megahertz and it's going all the way up to, you know, effectively almost 6 gigahertz, right? For most users in terms of what they're going to buy, that's a really impressive range that you can get right now out of the motherboards, right? So hopefully that answers your question, is that it's, again, not a question that the board is going to be limited, that it couldn't run at that speed. It's just more so that, one, those kits aren't necessarily available right now. And then two, in addition to that, that it doesn't mean that the CPU that you're going to get is going to be able to be guaranteed to run at that speed. Okay. Hey, Adam, do you have plans to increase compatibility with the Noctua NDH15S? Yeah, so actually it does fit. I know Noctua's website right now says that it doesn't fit. It does fit. I could, let's go ahead and let's do this. So I think I've got my D15S over here. Give me 1 second, guys, and I will show you here in a moment. So let's go. Let me cut over here to this board, and I will show you here in a moment. So give me 1 second here, guys. And I will show you in a moment. Oh, sorry. That's great, guys. Yes, I muted that just because I didn't want the audio to be on. So let me go ahead and recap that there. Thank you very much. No, just had that muted here. So again, what I was showing was essentially the Noctua D15S, right? So in terms of the D15 right here, this is essentially the cooler that the user was asking us about. Hey, will this actually work here on the Strix series motherboards? And some of the actual boards say that, quote unquote, that they don't have compatibility, but they actually are compatible. So if I show you again here, pretty straightforward, right? Let me go ahead and remove this user's comment here so you guys can see this a little bit more clearly. But here's the socket of the board, right? Here's the D15S, and you'll see I can actually go ahead and mount it. The main point that's of slight concern is essentially this, that this heat pipe right here, one of the heat pipes right here, just makes a little bit, it bumps up against this, right? But it doesn't physically affect the installation ability. So you can still go ahead and install the cooler in there pretty much normally without any overall obstructions or issues. Okay, so we are going to be working with Noctua to try to go ahead and get that updated and resolved, so you don't have to kind of worry about that. But overall, you will be able to kind of work with these kind of coolers. And this will generally be applicable to pretty much, I think, ROG Strix and Maximus boards. The Maximus boards even have a little bit more of a sloped design here on the heatsink to purposely actually give a little bit more clearance for larger towers. So it shouldn't generally be too much of an issue. Hopefully that covers your guys' questions there. Sorry about that. I just muted it there for a moment when I went to go pick up that cooler because I didn't want to hear you guys hearing my footsteps. All right, guys. Let me just go ahead and see if there's any questions there. And thanks for everybody that's letting me know that I did actually have that muted when I left there. Okay, it looks like we did cover the questions right there. So let me just see if there's anything else that has come up. Hey, when does the ASUS ZXE? I'm not sure if your question is when is it going to be available. It will be available shortly. Or if your question is, does the actual ProArt motherboard feature Thunderbolt 4? Yes, the Z690 does feature Thunderbolt 4 on board. So quite a number of actually the motherboards we do have, especially in the Maximus class, when you get into that, along with the ProArt, do feature Thunderbolt 4 natively on the motherboard. And there will also be motherboards that do feature the Thunderbolt Header, which is on the motherboard. I have my prime board here. Yeah. Let me see if I can find it for you guys. Yeah, I'll show you guys here. For if you guys are wondering about Thunderbolt 4, we ran a recent community poll that we found that actually most users, they don't need it. But on, I actually believe every single Z690 ATX motherboard, they will all support Thunderbolt 4. And so what I mean by that is if they don't have Thunderbolt 4 natively on there, if you really did have the need for Thunderbolt and you needed 40 gigabits, although, USB 3.2 Gen 2 by 2, 20 gigabits is really fast, and most users don't even have any type of devices that you can use 20 gigabits. But if you did need Thunderbolt 4, the best kind of mechanism that we have is to allow you to add it so that you don't necessarily have to pay for the cost if you don't need it right away, right? So how does that work? It's pretty straightforward. If you did want to add Thunderbolt 4, it's like we've done now for a couple of generations. There's actually a header right here. This is on the board. Let's see if I can focus that a little bit there for you guys. Yeah. Right here, this header right here is the Thunderbolt header. So you'll connect the cable, and then there's a card that installs on the motherboard, and that's the Thunderbolt 4 header. So then if you did want to go ahead and add Thunderbolt 4 to your system, that is all you need to do to actually be able to equip Thunderbolt 4. But the motherboard that user was asking about, the Z690 ProArt, that model already does come with Thunderbolt 4 natively on it. Let's see here if any other questions have come up there. Go ahead and answer a few more. It's a pretty big cooler, yeah. The Noctua D15 and D15S, they're a big kind of larger cooler, but there's value to those type of coolers. I like the simplicity of these coolers. They work really well. You don't have to worry about any type of pumps, and there's not extra kind of cables. It's literally just a large, massive piece of metal there to be able to effectively pull away the heat. So I like them really for kind of builds that I want to keep things minimal and not have to have a lot of cables that I have to manage in the system, but still be able to get really good thermal performance. Hey, Bianca. So yeah, you want to buy 2 kits of DDR 5200 megahertz. So this is actually a really good question, and this will apply to DDR4 and DDR5. So the important thing to keep in mind is if you buy 2 kits of memory, so we got, do I have, yeah, I've got, this is actually DDR5. This is from Kingston. This is Kingston's Fury Beast memory. And what I want to show you guys is going to be, does this memory actually have it listed here? Yeah, well, this says just a kit of 2, but I want to try to see if I have a kit here that shows you the values. If not, I can actually go into the UEFI. I do think I have this motherboard up and running. I can plug a cable in there. I can go in the UEFI. But I think I can show you guys here. Let's see if I can focus that. Okay, yeah, I can show you there, guys. Okay, so let's show you here. So right here, of course, is going to be the DRAM timing information for the memory, okay? And this is also the frequency. The important thing that you want to keep in mind is that when you buy a kit of memory, and let's say it's a two kits, right? Excuse me, two DIMMs and a two, right, in one pack, right? So you only get two sticks, as opposed to what you're saying, which is you want to buy 4 DIMMs, but essentially 2 packs of these 2 DIMMs, right? There can be a potential issue. And the reason is that when you go to enable what's called the XMP profile for this memory, the profile was actually written for 2 DIMMs only, not for 4 DIMMs. And if you actually check, most manufacturers will have slightly different timings for a 4 DIMM kit of memory than a 2 DIMM kit of memory. Okay. And it's a little bit tricky. This can actually cause problems. So when you go and you set up the motherboard and you enable the XMP profile, the motherboard may be able to kind of tune things. We do try to account for this, so we might be able to kind of auto balance everything to make it work for 4 DIMMs, but this may not always be the case. This could actually present you where the system could lock up. So you put in the memory, you go ahead and enable the XMP, and then you reboot, and then maybe the system doesn't actually reboot normally and it locks up. And that's because you're attempting to force those 4 DIMMs to run with the settings that was designed for 2 DIMMs. And like I said, 2 DIMMs is generally easier to run than 4 DIMMs. So it's not a guarantee. It may be an issue. But ideally, if you have to run 4 DIMMs, one is that you would want to try to get a native 4 DIMM kit. If you can't get a 4 DIMM kit and you want to run 4 DIMMs, you can just go ahead and try the XMP profile. The other option would be that you may then have to manually tune your profile to make it work for 4 DIMMs. So I would say in kind of the most extreme scenario, you can get it to work, but it may require you to manually tune that. So if we don't end up having anybody else's questions and you're really interested in that, Bianca, let me know and I can actually show you, I think in the UEFI, how that would work. It's not that complicated, but that is something to keep in mind, okay? Hey, Christopher, would you say that a Noctua D15 is enough for 12900K? Yes, I would say. So you're going to see a lot of media that are going to be, I think, a little bit critical of the overall thermal performance of the 12900K, but you have to keep in mind that the thermal performance is relative to what you're using on your system. Most users are not going to be running an extended heavy like 3D workload. They're not running Blender consistently for an hour straight, or they're not running Prime 95. So some of the thermal reports you see, while they are accurate, they're not necessarily really relevant to most general users when you're talking about just kind of gaming, using general Windows applications, when you're watching, YouTubes, checking out streams, checking out email, looking at photos, whatever it might be that you're using on your system. In that regard, a D15 is enough in terms of a kind of general experience. Now, will it offer you the same headroom under a heavier load that you're going to get from an AIO? No, an AIO would give you even better thermal performance. But I would say that you could actually run this part entirely at stock, still have the boosting behavior, and even actually have a little bit of moderate overclocking. And keep in mind, if you watch our AIOC stream, you'll see that our actually auto overclocking technology is based on the cooler performance. So what it means is that our system will automatically track the temperature of your CPU under what you're doing on your system. So if that's gaming, if that's some content creation, whatever it is, and based on that score, we will set the actual overclocking performance. So that is great, so that if you have something like a D15 versus something like a Ryugen 360, it will automatically adjust to that. And if you just want to run the system at pure stock, you will be okay. Hey, David, I actually think that the Z690P is already available on Newegg. I think I already saw it. I don't know if it sold out, but it was already available and it was listed on Newegg. So I'd go back and actually I'd check and see if it's actually available. Let me just see here. I think there was another question that popped up. Is a 240 millimeter enough for a 12900K? Yes. I would say that as long as you're not running a super aggressive, heavy workload, like consistently. So if you're essentially not doing like heavy extended, renders, doing some type of science and simulation workload that's heavily loading all the cores all the time, a 240 millimeter AIO is no problem. I actually ran for a lot of my initial testing a 240 and then switched over to a 280. And even with overclocking under general gaming, general usage usage experience, it was fine for that type of scenario. So I think you're entirely okay with that. You don't necessarily have to move up. Again, though, it depends on how you're going to use your system. If you're predominantly just going to be gaming on your system and then just doing general things, like I said, photos, web browsing, general use, a 240 millimeter AIO is fine for a 12900K. In terms of the Z690 Extreme, I'll have to double check. I think that actually it did get ready to get posted on terms of Newegg's site. Let me see here if I can actually pull up the parts list. But I thought I did actually see it there already. If not, you should see it within probably about the next, I'd say, 7 to 14 days. So I know I can see here the Hero. Somebody was asking about the Dash P. Dash P is on pre-order already, so you can pre-order the Dash P. Yeah, the Extreme is already out of stock, but they do have a notify for it. So you can go ahead and get the notification for it once it's been received. And like I said, that should probably be within the next kind of week to 2 weeks. David's asking, is there going to be a Wi-Fi version of the Dash A? No, there isn't going to be a Wi-Fi version. That model does not come. If you do want to add Wi-Fi, the recommendation would be to get our PCIe add-in card. We do have a Wi-Fi 6 version, and we will have also a Wi-Fi 6E version. So that would be the recommendation. I'll double check. I don't think this one has the CNVI-based header. On previous boards, we had a CNIV header, and I don't think that this one actually has that one. Yeah, I don't think that one has the CNIV header, so you can't add the small little module for it. So yes, if you do want Wi-Fi, you would want to take a look at pretty much almost any of the other motherboards in the lineup. Hey, Brian. Yeah, that sounds pretty cool. Yeah, you're using one of those older silver aero coolers. Those are still really big, dense coolers, so they still work really well even for larger systems. So you're asking about our Z690-I, so that's our mini ITX board and how it will be able to handle the 12900K. 100% no worries about it. The Z690-I has a very, very robust power delivery design. It's actually going to exceed some of that in terms of some of the ATX boards in terms of its power delivery design implementation, and the overall VRM, the heatsink assembly design, is very robust on the unit to be able to really ensure a very high level of performance in terms of that. So I can actually show you here, but it's a very large heatsink assembly that we have on there. It has an integrated heat pipe on the board. You don't really have to have any qualms or concerns in terms of that board being a limiting factor in terms of its overclocking capability for the 12900K. You could equally run just about the same level of performance that you would be able to have on the ATX level boards. So it's really going to just come down to what's the cooler that you're going to have there. That will be more the limiting factor than the motherboard. The Z690-I, it's an amazing board, and it's probably the highest performing mini ITX board that we've ever designed in terms of you talk about the power componentry and the heatsink design that is present on that board. So it's definitely not going to be a limiting factor for there. In terms of Gen 5, no, it's not Gen 5 supported. The primary PCIe Gen 5 is only going to be for the graphics card support. For the SSDs, those are going to be wired in for PCI Gen 4 support. So let's see here. Brandon's asking, I have a S28 Celsius, so I believe that's Fractal Designs AIO cooler, and he's going to get an ASUS Z690 board, and wondering where my motherboard has the extra holes for the back plate. Yeah, okay, so that's a good question. So yeah, we already talked about that a little bit earlier, but essentially, if we kind of go back there to our secondary cam here, and we take a look at the board, he's asking that where does he use the bracket? So the bracket will still essentially install right behind here, right? So you're going to put it right behind, and you'll see right there that you have kind of these larger mounting points. So one is going to be for 1200 and one's going to be for 1700. So you can still install that bracket and you're going to be good to go. The one thing that you do have to keep in mind though is that with the new Alder Lake series CPUs is that the height of the CPU is a little bit different. And because of the base plate design on some coolers, there's also a little bit difference. Sometimes the bonding contact might not be 100% ideal. And so it's kind of difficult to tell you whether that exact cooler configuration is going to work optimally. The best I can tell you is that you can mount it. You can use the bracketing design, hopefully torque it in there and be able to get enough contact pressure that you get overall good performance to be able to ensure that the CPU stays cooled sufficiently and is going to be stable and reliable. If ultimately it wasn't making contact, what you would end up probably seeing is that the CPU temperature would just rise up too quickly and it would be abnormally rising up. With that type of cooler, I would expect that even under kind of general gaming load, even with actually a moderate overclock, but let's just keep it at pure stock, you shouldn't probably see the temperatures get over about 80 C. If you all of a sudden started getting up consistent, like it was 85, 95, or if you was getting to 100 at pure stock settings, that means that there's not this kind of optimal contact and you would need to get the correct bracket so that it would help to account for that actual height differential between the older CPUs and the newer CPUs. And that's the main reason why all the kind of pre-existing coolers do require a new bracket, is that they're actually thinner to help to compensate for the height difference between the CPUs. So that's a good question. We don't use actually phase doublers. We haven't used phase doublers really in ages. Anytime that we actually have essentially a power delivery design where there's a higher count than essentially the native, let's say, output configuration capability of the actual primary PWM, it's because it's used in what's called a teamed power stage approach, which means actually we'll take two power stages and have them work in concert. But when you talk about doubling, doubling is entirely different. You're actually introducing a phase doubler as part of the VRM, which we don't like to do because we feel that adding a doubler actually adds latency, which is not ideal for a high core count configuration. We want very, very rapid response from the VRM, and our implementation has really been validated. If you look at the community's performance experience with our boards with teamed power stage based designs, which we've now had on boards for multiple generations on Intel and AMD, we have sent a definitive benchmark in terms of the performance that has been showed from entry-level boards to high-end boards. You can see teamed power stage designs on entry-level series that we've had, like on Tough Gaming, all the way up to our very high-end series motherboards on the Maximus class. And again, you can feel confident that in the power delivery design on any one of the boards that it's going to be able to ensure stable and reliable operation. Yes, Constantine's asking is, am I saying that essentially two sets of identical kits could be a problem? Yes, and that's because, as I noted, the profile for two DIMMs is going to be different than it would be if it was 4 DIMMs, okay? And if there's no more questions, I can probably end out the stream with kind of showing you a demo on what you might potentially want to change if that's the case, but it shouldn't be that much of an issue. Yeah, XMP works great. So Mike is here giving an experience that he was able to use XMP with 4 DIMMs. Again, I don't know if you bought 2 sets of DIMMs and then you're running 4 DIMMs, right? Or if you bought a native 4 DIMM configuration, but it's not that it can't work. I'm just prefacing that the reality is that depending on the kit, the frequency, the ICs that are being used, and a lot of different factors, you're potentially introducing a variable that is it can introduce a fault or a failure in having that memory initialized correctly. Now, as long as you actually don't enable the XMP, the memory will work at what's called a baseline SPD value, which is a more conservative value that will pretty much always work, which is great because that helps you test just the memory's working and everything is okay. And then from there, you can manually set a higher performing value that, once tuned correctly, would work for all 4 sticks. So 2 sets of Corsair 3600. 3600 is a fairly conservative setting, and a lot of our boards, like, again, we've spent a lot of time on something that's called auto rules. This is kind of like the internal quote unquote firmware magic that gets put in by our R&D team when we're doing actually interoperability and compatibility testing to help to just make the experience better for you. So even though it's a mistake to technically buy 2 sets of DIMMs that are as opposed to a 4-dim set, right? Or maybe you're a user that you start with 2 dims and then 6 months later or a year and a half later, you buy another 2 dims and you want to have them run at that same speed. You might do that anyways. So we do have to sometimes figure out internal logic to try to balance out certain subsettings to get all those memory, to get that memory to work correctly. So it's not that it might not work. It could entirely work. And Mike is, giving you evidence that yes, it was working on his part. But I'm also telling you that there are definitely cases where it can be an issue. So that's why I'm just telling you to just be mindful of that. Okay. Yeah, if you need 64, yes, your goal would be to go with 232. If not, then like I said, you could entirely have it work with 4. Like I said, I can't guarantee it, right? That's the difficult part. I can't guarantee it. All right, so I don't think that we probably have too many more questions. I'm going to go ahead and give some opportunity. If anybody else has any other questions, feel free to go ahead and ask. If not, I can show you guys here quickly in the UEFI for some people that are wondering about what would kind of be the way that I would approach making those settings or adjustments if I needed to have, let's say, 4 kits of memory, right, and having that work, but with essentially having 4 DIMMs work that were purchased because of a duplication in terms of your kits, right? So you bought 2 sets of 2 DIMMs, okay? So let's see how that would work in terms of the UEFI. Hopefully this will work, guys. I didn't actually preset this up here to plan for a UEFI demo, but I think I've got everything set up here, so I think I should be okay. So give me 1 second here. And let me go ahead and double check, and let me see if our output configuration is working here. Okay, cool. So that we're there in our OS environment. So I should be able to show this to you guys here. So let me get my keyboard here. And this actually might be cool for some of you guys in case you're wondering about how you can get into the UEFI environment. A lot of people will always tell you just hit the delete button. You don't actually have to hit the delete button at all. It can be easier than that. So maybe you guys will appreciate this. Okay, so let's go into our OS environment, and then I'll check and see if anybody's got any questions here. So give me 1 second. Okay, so we are in the OS environment. I don't have my secondary monitor, so I'm having to look at this. This is a very small window for me, guys. So give me 1 second. Hopefully, I will be able to see everything clearly enough here. Okay. So an easy way, if you need to get into your UEFI, is just type in recovery, and you're going to want to go to your recovery options, right? Excuse me, actually. Yeah, so right here, you want to go to recovery options. And right here, you see it says advanced startup. So we want to go ahead and click restart now. And I will show you actually how to do this. So you don't have to kind of spam or hit any kind of keys. Now, the reason why this can be a little bit more advantageous to do it this way is that USB is a polling-based mechanism as opposed to an interrupt mechanism. So that means that kind of the port is always kind of scanning for you to potentially hit the button. So that's why a lot of people just keep hitting the button. But if you don't want to kind of just be there hitting the button, then once you get here, you can go to then troubleshoot. Go to troubleshoot, go to advanced options, and then click this option right here that says UEFI firmware settings, and just restart, and then that will reboot straight into the UEFI. So you will be able to gain access to the BIOS. You don't have to kind of spam any buttons, okay? So right here, it is going to boot. I'm going to switch over, guys, just so nobody thinks that it's blacked out right there. That's just the boot process. And now it's going through that. So let me go ahead and just show you guys. So we're in the UEFI. Okay. So a couple of ways that you can kind of go check this information is all you need to do is just head over here to your SPD information. Your SPD information will help you to know all the information about the memory that you've installed on your ASUS motherboard. This is on Prime Series boards, Tough Gaming Series boards, ROG boards, ProArt. It doesn't matter. Any one of our boards does offer this SPD tool. You'll see right there that you have the corresponding XMP profile information. So this is what I was saying is that potentially when you add in another set of DIMMs, this profile information would be different if you had a 4-DIMM kit versus a 2-DIMM kit, right? So One of the easiest ways that you can attempt to kind of resolve this if you ran into an issue would be, hey, okay, let me go ahead and set maybe the XMP profile. Once you set that XMP profile, you would then actually want to go to your DRAM timing information. And once you go to your DRAM timing information, you'll see that those values have been changed, right? And generally, it can vary which one would be the influencing factor, but usually just bumping this up by one value would be enough to resolve an issue if you had a 4DIMM kit that wasn't working with the native profile because you mixed kits of memory. So that would allow you to go ahead and then just put that at 39. In your motherboard, that could be entirely different, right? The value could be different. It could have been maybe 40, or if it was DDR4, it could have been 18, and you would have then need to change it to 19. It wouldn't really matter. The whole point is that you could just increase that generally by 1, so that you could then have your 4 DIMMs work correctly. It could be that one of the other subtimings is more the limiting factor, but without getting too much into a deep dive into some of the other subtimings and how they relate to memory, or also potentially a value that is called your command rate could also be one of the ones that could be the limiting factor. That is also one that you could resolve. But like I said, because you can see here, there are so many values here, and I don't want to make this too complicated for anybody right now. The main one that you would just want to go ahead and adjust would be the, would be that primary timing. Just bump it by 1, and that should generally be enough to get you up and running. So if you did run into an issue, again, you bought 2 kits of memory, and you wanted to have those work, and let's say you applied the XMP and for some reason it wasn't working, that's something that you can try. Go back in after you reset the motherboard to defaults and then just bump up that primary timing by 1 value, okay? Richard, I'm glad that you found that useful, hopefully. This system actually right here is just a Windows 10 system. I've been going back and forth. I've been doing demos with both Windows 11 and Windows 10. Most users are still on Windows 10, so for some of the demos, I've been using Windows 10 because that's just what they're more comfortable with. But on one of my systems, I do already have Windows 11 set up there. Yeah, so you're going to have a little bit more of a challenge right now getting 32 DIMM kits, 32 gigabyte kits. They are going to be available, but they are going to be, I noted this a little bit earlier, for DDR5 specifically, they're going to be in lower availability compared to 16 gigabytes, which are going to be more commonly available. So again, if you do need 64 gigs right off the bat, I think that you'll be okay. I just wanted to give you a little bit of baseline, something to keep in mind. But I think one way or another, you're going to be able to make it work. Okay, Konstantin? Hey, Robert. Yeah, sure. Let me go ahead and take a look and see if I can check out this last tweet here from you guys. And then I think I will be getting ready to wrap up the stream, guys. But give me 1 second and see if wrong system I'm typing on here. In case anybody's wondering, Robert sent me over a tweet. You guys can tweet at me if you guys want. My handle is ASUS Tech Marketing JJ on Twitter. Hey, Robert, I'm not sure I see anything from you. So I'm not sure if you sent something over, man, but no worries about that. All right, guys. Well, I think that wraps up our stream, guys. Hopefully you guys found this interesting and useful. Again, if you guys are checking us out on demand on Facebook and YouTube, if you can drop us a like, a comment. If you're on YouTube, we'd appreciate a sub, and of course, any comments. And if you haven't, make sure to check out our PCDIY group. We aren't going to be doing the PCDIY Builder Spotlight in this week's stream. We spent a little bit of time just kind of catching up, answering your guys' questions. Hopefully you guys found that useful. But we will be coming back next week with the PCDIY Builder Spotlight. So that's where we actually feature your builds. It doesn't matter. It could be mini ITX, it could be ATX, it could be an older build, it could be air cooled, it could be water cooled. It doesn't matter. I love checking out your guys' builds and systems and setups. So if you guys are interested, make sure to join our PCDIY group. It's linked in the chat. It's also linked in the description for both Facebook and YouTube, and submit your build so that we can feature it on the PCDIY Builder Spotlight. So with that, guys, take care, take it easy, enjoy the rest of your day, and have a great weekend.